Can be some.
Bersin, yeah. So thank you, Arnav. So basically, crop rotation is done in a very planful manner, in a very pre-planned manner, right? So as to see, they are not being randomly just picked up, seeing, whatever sells good or whatever is expensive, the farmer might just think, let's grow them. No, it is totally dependent on the nutritional requirement. For example, whatever requirement maize has, after harvesting it, the soil must be totally, depleted with that nutrient. So they would grow, next crop that they would grow would not be a crop which would have a similar requirement, rather a complementary requirement, a different requirement, right? And also the soil is also prepared accordingly. The soil is also enriched accordingly so that it's ready for the next crop. Right. So in a 1 year rotation, what happens is that that most of the crops takes 3 months to 6 months time, right? So in the first year, they must have grown maize or maize and mustard, or maybe they grew rice and wheat. The two different requirements, right? If you see, rice requires a huge amount of water, paddy, whereas wheat does not require that much water. Right? Similarly, there is also a 2 year rotation. What are the 2 year? Okay, maize. In case of maize, if you see, it's a rain crop, right? Rain crop, obviously in rains, it automatically gets a lot of rains, a lot of water. Whereas mustard is more of a winter crop, right? So it doesn't require much water. So they pick and choose the crops in such a way so that they complement each other's requirement. Okay. Now comes the 2 year rotation. In the 2 year rotation also, they pre-plan that what is it that we are going to grow in the next 2 years, so that we ready the soil, we keep the soil ready accordingly. Correct? So this is how they plan for a year, 2 years, or even at most also for 3 years. But many a times what happens is that the environmental conditions could be there's a flood or maybe a rainfall where the plan could go a little haywire, and there could be a change in plan, right? So it's always better to go for a short-term plan, 1 year max to max 2 years, but a 3 year plan might require some changes in between. Okay. So how are the selection done for crops and rotation, Arnav? Please read out.
Yes, ma'am. Selection of crops of rotation. Source of moisture. Status of nutrients in the soil. Availability of inputs. Duration of crop short or long. Marketing and processing facilities.
Correct. So basically the crops that you would be selecting would, as I said, it would depend a lot on the water requirement. I just now said, no, the source of moisture. Would it be rain fed like maize, or would it require water from irrigation, right, like river, or maybe bunds or channels or canals, right? So a lot would depend on the season. So accordingly, they'll choose the crop, right? The status of nutrients in the soil. So what is the level? They would also go for a soil test, and they would check that what are the nutrient condition of nutrients in the soil. Accordingly, they'll choose the crops. They would not choose the crop, as I said, randomly, right? They would keep a few things in mind, and only then they'll choose the crop. Availability of inputs, whether the farmer has machines or not, whether he has manpower or not, whether he has the money to buy enough pesticides or fertilizers or not, whether there's electricity, abundant electricity there in the village or not, because only if there is abundant electricity he'll be able to use the water pump, then he'll be able to irrigate well, then he'll be able to grow paddy. So there are a lot of things, which has to be kept in mind before the crops are being selected. Okay. Duration of crop, short or long. So, it also depends on the kind of money the farmer wants to make. Does he want to make quick money, or does he want to, slow and steady wins the race type, and he'll wait and then he'll earn some good amount of handsome money. So he'll go for that accordingly. He'll either grow a short-term crop or a long-term crop, right? A short-term crop could be, like these methi, pudina, spinach, and all. And long-term could be like really long. He could wait for several years, maybe orange orchard or apple, grapes. Several years he could wait and then wait for the harvest. Marketing and processing facilities. So the types of crops that he would select would also depend a lot on the kind of saleability, whether he'll be able to market or sell the harvest. How would he be able to sell? What is the demand? Accordingly, he'll select the crop. There's no use selecting a crop which has very less demand. Then he'll not make much money. Right. And the processing facilities, because there are certain crops which requires processing. So is that processing facility close by to his place? Is it handy? If it is not, then he'll not go for that kind of crop. For example, if he chooses mustard, what will he do? Just growing mustard, he needs to take out, oil from the mustard and convert it into mustard oil. So if he has an oil mill on his own, or maybe he has an oil mill in an area where he stays close by, where they work out an amount and they say that, okay, I'll work out this thing for you, and I'll get certain share. But if he has nobody in his known circle of friends who has a oil mill, then no use growing a mustard. Right? I just gave you a crude example, but what I meant is that processing facilities should be handy. Only then he'll be able to grow that kind of crops. Okay. Advantages of crop rotation. Arnav, once more.
Crop rotation helps in replenishment of soil fertility. It prevents depletion of selective nutrients. It prevents building up of diseases and pests of particular crop. It enhances the production by increasing the soil fertility.
Correct. So we have been reiterating this time and again that crop rotation actually helps in the replenishment of the soil fertility, because not every crop would have the same nutrient requirement, right? So they would pick and choose the crops accordingly. Now it prevents depletion of selective nutrients. So basically there are certain nutrients which could get depleted in the soil, right? If the farmer has to grow, for example, wheat again and again every year, in his farm, then after 2 years, that particular mineral or the particular nutrient which the wheat requires in high amount will be completely depleted from the soil. The soil will have a zilch of that nutrient. It will be completely depleted. So might as well grow something else which will rather replenish it instead of growing wheat every year, right? It prevents building up of diseases and pests of particular crops. So what happens is that, certain fungal infection or certain pests are attracted towards certain crops. So if he grows the same kind of crops every year, like every year Rabi, he will grow that kind of crop. If he does this year on year, then the fungal infections, the fungus or the bacteria or the rodents, they'll be waiting that again next year it will be more of a periodic cycle. Come next year again we'll get to see paddy and we'll chew and munch on them. Right. So instead of that, the farmer should give them a surprise by growing something else, some other crop by rotation. Okay. It also enhances the production by increasing the soil fertility. Right? The first and the last point are almost the same. So it basically increases the fertility of the soil by replenishing it. Okay. Crop protection management. So this is very important. All the crops that are being grown, taken care of, right? They are affected big time by pests and a large number of weeds, right? So these weeds, the pests, the rodents, all of them needs to be controlled time to time, right? A seasoned farmer, an experienced farmer would know beforehand that, the moment he gets some indications or some symptoms that, the plant is behaving in such a manner, he would get an inkling and he would start using those pest control measures. Right? The moment he sees a weed growing here and there, he'll immediately take action. He'll either handpick them and throw away, or maybe, he'll just go for a weedicide. Okay. So weeds, as we know, these are unwanted plants, right, which takes away nutrition from the main crop, right, and they reduce the growth of the crop, they hamper the crop. So examples are wild sorghum, cholai, bathua, parthenium. These are all examples of weeds which are unwanted, right? So they should be taken away the moment they are seen. How? They can be taken up mechanical methods, right? For example, they could use certain equipments or tools, khurpi, etc., to dig out those weeds. They could use chemicals like weedicides, but which would have harmful effects on the crop, or they could use biological way. For example, they could leave certain insects in the field which are fond of those weed. So what, instead of eating the crop, it will only eat the leaves of the weeds. So the weeds can be taken into control, right? Next we have pests. Pests actually are there of so many types, aphids, locusts, weevils, beetles, etc. They are harmful for the crop plants and they need to be managed really well. Otherwise, they grow very fast and in huge number. So they are basically of three categories: chewing insects, sucking insects, and borer insects. Right? All of them can be managed in different ways, depending on what is the category of pest or category of insect. Right? The root cutting type of insects can be controlled by mixing insecticide in the soil. Right? So instead of just spraying thoroughly on the plant, on the crop, might as well spray it on the soil, because there are certain insects which affect the roots. The stem and leaf cutting and boring type of insects can be controlled by dusting or spraying the contact insecticides like malathion and lindane. Right? So they can be sprayed or dusted on the crops, because these are boring or cutting kind of insects. And what are those sap sucking insects doing and how do we control them? You have to just generously spray. You have to generously spray insecticides all over the crop so that the sap sucking insects can be controlled. Right? Arnav, can you please read the disease control portion?
A wide variety of plants pathogens such as bacteria, virus and fungi exist in our environment. Pests infect and cause serious disease in our crops. The disease caused by these pathogens include blast in paddy, ra- rust in wheat, and red rot in sugarcane.
Yeah. So I'm sure many of you, when you must have eaten sugar cane, no, you must have seen those red patches. Even after peeling the skin of the sugar cane, you must see those red patches. Those are the red rot disease, the red rot disease of the sugar cane, which is very commonly seen in sugar canes. And this really kind of, hampers the entire yield, because that means it starts rotting. The sugar cane starts rotting from that place. Right? So there are different diseases which could be caused because of a rodent or maybe a microbe or maybe some plant pathogen. There are so many different kinds of pathogen which actually exist in our environment. So you never know which gets attracted and which attacks which crop. So you really have to be very aware and alert of what's happening when. Right? So what are the disease control? There are mainly of four types: seed-borne disease, soil-borne disease, airborne disease, and waterborne diseases. Right? So these are a few kind of diseases which could actually hamper the crops. Right? Now comes the storage of grains. How do you store the grains? The proper and safe storage of food grains is necessary to ensure their availability throughout the year. I'm sure all of you must have studied in class 8 also, where you must have discussed that, storage of grains is very important, right? You could also store it in huge granaries, but those granaries have to be waterproof. They have to be fireproof. They also cannot have, any gaps or creaks or crevices so that rodents can get in, right? They could have been made out of metals. They could be silos, right? Like a huge structure. They look like granaries, right? So they have to be stored it in such, many a times what happens is that nitrogen gas is pumped into the granaries so that oxygen, whenever there is oxygen, it oxidizes and spoils grains and food. And it also helps the pathogens to thrive. So oxygen, if it is taken out and smartly nitrogen is being pushed into the granary, then it really works wonder, right? Now the biotic factors are insects, rodents, birds, fungi, mites, and bacteria. So these are certain biotic factors which could hamper the storage, and certain abiotic factors are moisture content and temperature, right? So moisture and temperature really can hamper the storage areas. So very high temperature, very low temperature, moisture is a big no-no.